India faced several trespassing and transgressions of many invaders. From Cyrus the Great to the Mongols and Turks, and even Alexander the Great, India's rich resources and strategic position made it a highly desirable conquest for many empires and civilizations. But none was like what Portuguese achieved in 16th century. By 1509, Francisco de Almeida, the Portuguese nobleman and soldier, have successfully built a Portuguese stronghold along the Malabar coast. In fact, focusing only on naval supremacy, he ensured Portuguese control over the seas and the sea route by driving out powerful rivals like Mamluks and Gujaratis. But when King Manuel I recalled him, he had no choice but to hand over power to Afonso de Albuquerque, a Portuguese general whose ambitions and cunningness that would make Portugal not only a maritime force but a political power in India and beyond. And by this time, Portuguese encountered several favorable conditions in India and the surrounding regions that enabled them to establish a dominant position in the Indian Ocean. The major favorable condition was the fragmented political landscape. Except for Gujarat, ruled by the powerful Sultan Mahmud Begara, much of northern India was fragmented. Smaller kingdoms controlled different territories, limiting any single ruler's influence over trade routes or ports. When it came to the Deccan region, the Bahmani kingdom was breaking apart into smaller sultanates like Bijapur, Ahmednagar, and Golconda. This fragmentation prevented any centralized effort to counter the Portuguese presence in coastal areas. Added to this, none of the Indian powers had significant naval forces. While many rulers controlled vast land armies, they had neither the tradition nor the resources to develop substantial navies. This left the coastline vulnerable to Portuguese maritime strength, enabling the Portuguese to establish fortified positions along key trading ports. It was with these conditions Alfonso de Albuquerque stepped into the shores of India. Albuquerque, known as the Caesar of the East, saw the vast potential for Portugal in capturing key territories and controlling land-based trade routes. Unlike Almeida, Albuquerque believed in aggressive expansion and military domination across the land. With this, Albuquerque began his conquest, and the first land he laid his eyes was Goa. Albuquerque allied with Timoji, a Hindu privateer who had local influence and held resentment against the Muslim rulers of Bijapur. Seeing the Portuguese might and potential, Timoji offered Albuquerque information and support in his bid to conquer Goa. Capitalizing on the element of surprise and the local discontent with the Bijapur rulers, Albuquerque led a Portuguese fleet and seized Goa with relatively little resistance in 1510. The capture of Goa marked the beginning of European colonialism in India. But Albuquerque's dream of expansion and domination wasn't done just yet. In 1511, Albuquerque captured Malacca, a critical choke point of spice trade between the East Indies and Europe, which would remain a significant source of wealth and influence for Portugal. Following this, Albuquerque pursued alliances and established Portuguese bases in the Persian Gulf, most notably in Hormuz, which allowed Portugal to control access to the Gulf. To make sure the sea routes are secured, Albuquerque introduced the Cartaz System, a naval trade permit that Albuquerque imposed on all non-Portuguese ships operating in the Indian Ocean, the Arabian Sea, and the Bay of Bengal. Once the license was established, Albuquerque began to target the key shipbuilding ports to control and monitor the construction of vessels in the region. At the same time, regions across Gulf and Red Sea began to face shortage of timber, the most essential raw material for shipbuilding. This in turn reduced the amount of ships being built across the region and further reduced the number of voyagers and explorers across the major trade routes. And this further strengthened Portugal's grip on maritime trade in the Indian Ocean, diminishing the naval capacities of local powers and curtailing competition. But despite all this, Albuquerque is known for two major decisions that were wildly controversial and contentious Let me talk about the first one that created controversy in India. When Albuquerque took control of Goa from the Sultan of Bijapur, he wasn't just inheriting a strategic port or a new colony. He was stepping into a world of ancient traditions, intricate beliefs, and cultural customs that looked bewildering to European eyes. Among these was the practice of sati. Sati involved a Hindu widow sacrificing herself by sitting on her deceased husband's funeral pyre. Many in the community regarded it as the highest form of marital loyalty, an act of deep respect and devotion. But to Albuquerque, this was horrific, an unspeakable cruelty forced upon grieving women. And without much hesitation, he announced an immediate ban on sati. Albuquerque's logic was straightforward. He believed that Portugal had a civilizing role to play, and saving these women from what he saw as needless suffering fit neatly into that mission. The ban initially met with tough resistance from local communities who saw it as an attack on their traditions, and they further intensified religious tensions between the Portuguese and Hindu communities. Albuquerque's regime was already known for its aggressive Christianization policies, including converting Hindu temples into Christian churches. The ban on sati was seen as another infringement on Hindu customs. The second decision he made that created controversy even across Europe was when Albuquerque realized the importance of local alliances. He encouraged Portuguese soldiers and settlers to marry local women, hoping to create a mixed race community that would support Portuguese interests. With this policy, Albuquerque hoped that a mixed race community, fluent in both Portuguese and local languages, would serve as a bridge between cultures, aiding in administration and trade. Plus, many Portuguese soldiers were single men or adventurers without families during the period. Mixed marriages offered a solution enabling them to build families in Goa and put down roots, thus discouraging them from leaving. With Portugal flexing their dominance across land and sea, Portugal managed to secure a far reaching empire in the east that spanned across Goa, Malacca, Hormuz, and Mozambique. With undisputed monopoly over the spice trade, Lisbon became one of the wealthiest cities in Europe as exotic goods poured in from across the Indian Ocean. But soon, ships with strange flags began to appear in the distant harbors. Ships carrying British flag from one side and ships carrying Dutch flag from the other side ripped into Portuguese strongholds one by one. And the Portuguese, once undisrupted rulers of these seas, could only watch helpless as the British and Dutch sailed into the Indian Ocean, carrying the last chapter of Portuguese domination in India.